Hello, this is Megan Longoria, and I'm going to take you through a quick chart makeover from a chart that I found on Twitter from the Colorado Department of Transportation. There are a couple of just fundamental issues with the chart that could be quickly and easily remedied to make it easier to read, and this is especially important when you're making charts for the general public. You can't assume a level of data literacy. You can't assume much background knowledge on your subject, and you want people to read the information, and it's probably not mandatory for them. So if it looks like too much effort, if it's too busy, then people will just skip your chart. So we're going to look at this chart, and I'll show you the tweet it came from. Here we go. So it's from the Colorado Department of Transportation Twitter account. And Colorado is currently running a campaign called The Heat Is On. And they're going to be checking for DUIs basically all the rest of August and into September through Labor Day. And as they're telling us that and linking us to the news article about it, they've given us some statistics. So we've got suspected impaired driving fatalities by year from 2016 to 2020, and they linked to their data source. Today I'm going to be focusing on just the chart and not the tweet text as well. So we're going to look at this and see if we can improve it just by making some small design changes. And the first thing that I notice when I look at it is there's giant blocks of color. Each year has its own color in the chart. And then we have this big, thick orange line right here that takes up a lot of attention and room. Then I notice that we've got the logos on the left, which it's fine that they're in the chart, but I probably want people to read what this chart is about before I give them all the logos that say, what it's related to, that it's CDOT, State of Colorado, and it's part of the Heat Is On campaign. Another thing I notice is this is all uppercase up here. Every single letter is capitalized, and that's a bit unnecessary. We don't need to type in all caps. And there's not much space between the bars. You sometimes see this when we have histograms where we're showing ranges of values, but with a categorical bar chart, it's actually better to have some space that is, I think some guidelines will tell you you should have less than half the width of the bar be space in between each bar. These bars themselves are needlessly wide, so I would go less than half, but there's definitely not enough space there. There's no reason to have those so close together like that. And we don't need a legend like this at the bottom with the colors. One, because this should probably be all one color. And two, because we're basically direct labeling. 2017 goes with the bar right above it. So we can make our bars skinnier. And then we can also make our proportion of the text size to the bar better. So their data labels are very large, but the actual category or year label on the x-axis is kind of small. The other thing I noticed, which is probably just a preference, but could be helpful, is they just say fatal crash statistics by county. And then they link you to the data source. And that's fine, but what if we actually said, hey, this is the data source we use for this chart, and just call it out explicitly so that people know, oh, that's not an extra link for necessarily different additional information. We're citing our data source. So I'm using Power BI Desktop, and I tried to recreate the original chart as they designed it. So I've got their logos on the left, similar to what they did, and my capitalized text. I put a big fat orange line in there, and then I used pretty similar colors, although not exact, and then I put their link at the bottom. There's a couple things, and this I actually had to make quite a few changes to get it like this, because the defaults in Power BI are actually steering you in a better direction. Typically, when you make a bar chart with a single measure and no additional items in the legend, you're going to end up with one color. And on the default color palette, it's blue, kind of a lighter medium blue. So I actually had to click Show All to be able to make this be like the original chart. The other thing I had to do was to change this inner padding to 2%. I believe the default is 20%, and I'll show you what that looks like real quick. That's the normal default in Power BI. Notice there's a lot more space. Put it back to 2. So it's just these giant blocks, and having them be wider doesn't give me any extra information. Power BI doesn't like line breaks in the title, so I had to use a text box to be able to recreate this. If you ever have to do this, I'll show you a tip when we get to my revised version for accessibility purposes. But when I look at this, it's just kind of busy and bulky. So what I want to do is go a little more minimalist and focused. So here's my version. I did this in 10 minutes, and I think it is a lot better already. So I moved the title to the left side because in Western cultures, we tend to read left to right, top to bottom, and I want the first thing that is there to be my title. I want people to get useful information first. So they're going to read in non-capitalized letters, suspected impaired driving fatalities by year 2016 to 2020. And then I can have my nice logos that tells you what this is related to. That's all fine. I don't need, before I go into that, if you are going to provide the interactive version of something like this, where you've used a text box for the chart title, and the reason that I still did this was because the chart title here doesn't have a lot of space between it and the plot area. So to make it be similar to the original, I kept this. So what I want to do for accessibility is enter my text in the alt text here, but also go to my chart, turn the title on, and I've already put it in here once, but put the title in there, but turn it off again. So we're not affecting the layout of the chart, but when someone comes through here with a screen reader in Power BI, they'll get the chart title. If this ever gets separated, then they'll still get the information. They'll know that this is related to this chart. That's exactly what's in there. And then they can go further into the chart and actually get the data. So the other very noticeable thing I did is I removed that horizontal line that was in there. If we go back to the original, we're just lightening it up a bit so that your eyes kind of focus a little more on what we think is important. So now I've chosen one color, and maybe they weren't allowed to choose this red color because they have, branding guidelines or data visualization guidelines that someone has set, so they needed to use blue and orange first. That's fine. Given the subject that it's about fatalities that died in probably a gruesome way in a traffic accident due to suspected DUI, I chose this darker red because it has an implied emotional meaning related to the subject. there's no one color that is perfect for your charts, but try to choose something that you feel is appropriate, and this is what I decided. The other reason I like this color is because it's very good color contrast. If I pull up my handy color contrast analyzer, I can grab the color here, and I have kind of a light gray background now, which I'll discuss in a minute. The contrast from the background is 7.6 to 1, which is really good. I usually go for 4.5 or more if I can, but I try to use 3 as the lower limit of what you would do for bars. And if I grab white, my data labels have good contrast. So for me, this was a good color because it stands out enough, but isn't quite as in your face as the kind of kindergarten crayon colors going on in the original. I did change the background to light gray, as I said, and I wasn't super specific about it this time. I just chose kind of the lightest white 10% darker color and then turned on the transparency a bit to lighten it up. White is very, very stark when we're looking at it. If people have to look at it for a long time, especially, it can be a bit grating. So here's white, and in the original image, they had kind of a lighter gray at the top, and then they went white for the actual chart area. So I wanted it to be, one, consistent, and 2, a little less stark on the pure white. I also tend not to use, pure black for text or background or anything. Everything you'll see in here is not, pure 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I want good contrast so it stands out from the background and is easily readable, but I don't need it to be the highest contrast possible with black on white. So we covered our title. I fixed the capitalization to be more easily readable. We don't need everything to be all caps. It doesn't help in any way. It actually can make it harder for some people to read. I moved the data labels inside, and this is a preference. I'm not aware of research stating definitively one way or the other, but I like people to take advantage of being able to skim over the tops of the bars to compare heights. And when you have big, large text, the original was actually very bold. I feel like it distracts from the bars. So I like data labels just fine. I just don't think that was the right level of prominence. There's a concept called visual hierarchy, and things that are larger or bolder, have more contrast, stand out more to us. So those are some of the things we'll notice first, and some of the things that we assume are more important based on their design. So I put my data labels inside, and because I'm using a dark red bar, I did use white here to make it stand out while it's inside the end of the bar. And you can control that in Power BI. If I go to data labels, and I'm using Trebuchet font because it was probably the closest to what they were using in the original, not because it is my preference. So your position, it defaults to auto, but you can change it to inside end if you prefer that it always be inside the bar. Sometimes with auto, you'll have a couple that are above and a couple below, and I don't love that. And this way I can also choose my font color and make it consistent so that it works all the time. Whereas if I chose the white color and then it ended up on the white background, that wouldn't work, and I'd have to put a background around my data label, which is another thing on the page that can be distracting, although sometimes useful. So I changed the color, formatted my data labels, and I also made my x-axis much bigger compared to the width of the bars. So the bars are a little skinnier in my version. Remember our original here. There's more space between them. And then I just adjusted the spacing between the title text box and the images, the chart itself, and my data source. So I went ahead and labeled it data source so people know what it is we're linking them to. And if it's the interactive version, I want to make sure that it's actually a clickable link. If it's not, maybe I consider doing a shortened link so that people don't have to type all of that in, or put a QR code in so that people can easily get to that data source. And then I made sure things were mostly aligned. One thing about Power BI is if you actually align the container around the visual, there are varying amounts of space based on the different types of visuals. So sometimes you need to adjust. If you go format, align, left, it might not look as lined up as you want it to be. So you'll have to decide if you actually need it to line up perfectly, or if you based on the outside container, or if you need to adjust it so that the inside contents line up. So that's my bare bones, much easier to read version. If they wanted to do something arguably a little better, maybe they go for something like this. So what they were doing before was definitely reporting the statistics. Here's the numbers. What do you want people to know about the numbers? What's your message? So what I see is fatalities were up in 2017, and then they went significantly down, but they were back up in 2020. And their campaign is trying to keep that number down in 2021. So let's look at this again. And I left the title the same. I played around with putting "don't become part of the statistic" up at the top as part of the title to make my title be consistent with my message, but I decided to do it this way instead. So I took my same chart, I added a blank space for 2021, and I did that by, let's do, just adding another row to my data and leaving the value blank, but then turning on categorical axis, and then going to my year and choosing show items with no data. So there would be a blank spot here. And then I just put a bar, or a shape rather, and filled it in, and then I added a question mark on top to say, we don't know what this number is yet, but we hope you are not part of it. And that made my chart a little wider, which would give me the opportunity to make my text as big as possible to make it easier to read. And then just as a visual indicator to say, hey, this is what we're paying attention to, is, it was nice and kind of going down, but the trend year over year from 2019 to 2020 is concerning. It started going back up. Because of that, because I've added some extra elements and I want it to be easier to read, you'll notice that I took off my y-axis. In the original, I had grid lines and the y-axis there. Arguably, you don't need both the y-axis and grid lines plus data labels. It's usually cleaner to do one or the other, unless people are actively comparing exact, numbers, differences, and they need those grid lines. A more minimalist version would have used one or the other, but I left it to be kind of like the original, because a lot of people have it in their style guides that you can have data labels, but you can't remove your y-axis. And I went ahead and labeled it year here at the bottom this time, just to make sure people know, since I took out the 2016 to 2020 in the title. And so it's still, the focus is still on the red. We're adding this to make people really think about it, because I want someone to take an action to make a decision based off this chart, that they're not going to drive while under the influence, so that they don't become part of this statistic. And I think that gives it more focus, more of a message than just we are reporting the numbers. So that's my makeover. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something, and hopefully even agree with my design decisions. Feel free to leave me questions in the comments on YouTube or my blog post about this. So we started, just to review, with this chart with lots of colors, a lot of capitalized text, just a lot of extra cognitive load because there are extra big heavy elements on the page. We cleaned that up to be an easier to read version, and then we gave it more message and focus. And that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching.